Okay, just some notes. Um, we've been publishing Canadian Musician magazine for 44 years, and probably the two areas of interest we get the most are how do you get more gigs? And if you go back a couple of years, how do I get any gigs? Because there weren't any, but now there are. And also how to get a record deal is another one, and that's actually our next webinar on May 25th. And you'll all get an email for that, so you can attend that. So that's one reason we've done the webinar. And musicians want to play, they want to get gigs, but a lot of times they don't know what to do. They don't know how to do it better. It's not only a question of getting gigs, it's also getting better gigs than you have currently. You might be playing once a month in your Aunt Martha's kitchen, and you might just want to upgrade that to Aunt Mabel, who's richer. Just fool around there. But anyway, the quality of gigs is important too, for sure, and location. The chat is activated, so you can chat back and forth. You can ask some questions. If you want people here to contact you, you can put that into the chat and you can just chat with specific people or everybody. It just depends what you want to do. This is being recorded, so there'll be a recording available afterwards. You'll get an email probably by tomorrow. So if you want to pass it on to anybody or listening to it yourself, we also have created a page of resources. You'll get an email today at 4 o'clock EST, and it'll indicate all the various resources. And in there, if you didn't get a chance to look at the bios of the various speakers, all of that's in there on the resources page as well. So speaking of speakers, we have three great speakers today: Mark Rogers, Brendan McCarney, and Justin Kwan. After I'm going to be interviewing or discussing things with the three folks here. After that, we're going to separate into breakout rooms. Okay, and if Zoom cooperates today, the last time it kind of lost its mind at that point, but we ended up in the breakout rooms. Some people ended up the one for Dairy Queen, but today hopefully that'll work. You can choose the breakout room you want to be in, and the main thing is the three speakers have to choose the ones with your name on them. Otherwise, there'll be people they're looking for and you won't be there. And then you can also change as well. So if you go into one of these breakout rooms and you want to see what's going on in the other one or two, you can change. And some people had trouble finding that in our last webinar, but it's just at the bottom, and you can just switch to another breakout room. Okay. And there, all the video, audio, everything's enabled, so you can just have a great old chat. We have like half an hour to 45 minutes allocated. The last time I had to shut them down at 5:30. People were in there for 3.5 hours. Typical Canadians, they just want to get in there and chat away. So, but no problem. As long as the breakout leader is still there, you can go as long as you want. Important thing with this event, any other events we do, or any knowledge gathering that you do, the important thing is follow up. And this is where people fail. And the key there is make a to-do list, 3 items that you're going to do differently from now on. Because if you're dissatisfied with your progress, and we all should be, the problem is people go to trade shows, they go to Canadian Music Week, Breakout West, and by Monday, they're just doing everything the same as the way they did it before. And they say, well, that event really sucked. No, the event didn't suck. You just have to get it still down to some things that you can actually do. And because if I go to a trade show, I come back with so much stuff, and you just have to get it down to 2 or 3 priorities in your case. So the time is now. Okay, pandemic is over, at least 98%. I'm sure there's still some COVID hanging around, but more or less, certainly the ban on live events is gone, and that was a terrible time. Certainly for everybody here, I would raise your hand if that was a terrible time. When you couldn't go anywhere, you couldn't go to a restaurant, you couldn't go to a movie, you couldn't go and listen to music, you couldn't play music live. So that's done. Live music is expanding right now. Um, I was going to say booming, but it's not necessarily booming, but it's certainly expanding all the time. There's way more of it around, and this is again good timing. So the one thing is that there's lots of competition. So for every place there is to play, whether it's in a club or a concert or a festival or whatever it is, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of artists out there that want to be there. Okay, so you got to get out there. You got to, get there first, or do everything you do best, so you can get those slots. So that's really important. So your to-do list. Here's 3 suggestions. They're pretty general, but the first is to make your act booking friendly. That's pretty general, but that's if you really suck, unless you're going after an audience that likes bands that really suck, well, that's part of being booking friendly. You have to be able to have people see you once and actually want to see you a second time. So that's part of it, and there's countless other things that our speakers will talk about. Always be building your audience in every way you can, live, online, constantly building your audience so that you've got a larger audience of potential people that can come out and see you live. And then part of it from there is communicating with them through newsletters and live, of course, and social media to let people know. I see a lot of acts and you go to their website and there's no indication of where they're playing. Or it's just got all the past ones. We played here in 1972. Well, that's very interesting. But you need that everywhere if you're playing live. And then doing the connection with the live music market. So that's getting the gigs. That's really what the third part is. So you can be ready to blow people's minds and have a huge potential audience, but you're still sitting in your basement. You're not doing anything. So you've got to get out and you've got to connect with the market and get the gigs. That's really what it's about. Okay, we're going to start with Mark Rogers. Mark's been with LMT Connection for a couple of 100 years, I think. It's a long time anyway. And they're busy people. Just to stay together that long, it's what, 30 some odd years, I think?
34.
Yeah. How many years is it, Mark?
34.
Okay. Well, that's pretty amazing. For most acts to stay together 34 days is a miracle. So that's amazing, that long. And then during that time, I've seen LMT Connection quite a few times, and just love their music. Great people. Apparently they've done over 6,000 shows. That makes me tired right there. They've done 25 international tours, Europe, China, just all over the world, Canada, United States, 40 US states. And Mark, as well as being one of the best drummers I've ever seen, because back in the olden days, I used to be a drummer many, many years ago. Mark's also the manager. He looks after getting the bookings, and they've done most of that just on their own. So that's a lot of work for sure. So just to give you a clue what the band's about here, I've got a YouTube video with.
I got one thing to say. You are a great house. I didn't let it on. I got that girl a brick house.
So great, makes you want to get up and dance. And if you've ever seen me dance, it would make you not want to get me up and dance. But um, Mark, just a question. I've always been amazed at how you got all these tours, but going back further, just for a minute, back to the beginning of the band, how did you get your first gigs starting 30 some odd years ago?
Well, we came into the market from a traveling Motown review. It was a 10-piece show. This was back in the 80s, where we were doing, those kind of rooms, big rooms, doing festivals and touring. But at that time, the market changed in the late 80s. Things like 10-piece bands, there was venues we were playing, say in Toronto, like the Club Blue Note and the Network, and they had a lot of rooms back then that accommodated big groups. That kind of changed in the late 80s, early 90s, where those big budgets went down. And this as far as playing, I guess what you call tribute or cover music. And we just, out of necessity, we took the rhythm section from that band, which was myself and Leroy Manuel, guitar player and singer, and the bass player. And we just broke it down to a three-piece. And we were from Niagara Falls, so we started just hammering out in the Niagara Falls, St. Catharines area. And before we knew it, we were playing 6 nights a week, probably within 6 months of that. But they were very different kind of gigs. They weren't the big showrooms that existed back at that time. We were lugging our own PAs, and we were playing clubs, bars, you name it, biker bars, everything from wherever we could get a gig. And we just built a following in the Niagara region. And it was a slow burn as far as getting out of the Niagara region. It took a few years, actually, even at that point. And because the industry had changed from, this was what I would call the beginning of the smaller gigs, where instead of being in one place for 6 nights, you would play 6 different venues in 6 nights. And so you travel very small, but on an economical level, you're making way more money because you're, charging more per night. So that was then, and we just kept grinding. Elbow grease. It was hard work. And eventually we broke out to other areas in Ontario. And this is after about 2 or 3 years. Then we started playing Hamilton, and finally got to Toronto, but back to Toronto. And what I'm trying to say is that it was very, very hard work of just putting our nose to the ground and working it. That scene has changed a lot. It changes every 5, 7 years. For us, early 90s to the late 90s, we started to get international work. And then everything changed. And then we started promoting our original music. So it was just a slow build. It wasn't an overnight success, and it still is hard work. Like we still are very hardworking guys. So I think if there's anything I have to offer for this seminar,
Excellent.
it is to work your ass off.
So the first tour that you did, was that Europe, I recall, or where was the
Yeah,
first place? And
yeah.
how long ago was that?
The first tour of Europe was 2003, and we had released an original album in the 90s that did quite well on a local level. And that album ended up at the Midem show in France, and somebody from there heard it, a German record label, and they liked it. They liked our original music. So all of a sudden we had a chance to get distribution through the German label, and that got us to a German promoter, which in turn got us throughout Europe for the next, well, to this day, actually, we still work Europe a lot, but we were together for 14 years before we had that break of international touring with our original music. And at the same time, on a local level, we still were doing different kind of work, cover music, blended with our original stuff. But in Europe, they wanted more of the original album stuff, and we released 7 albums from there.
So in going to Europe that first time, how did you keep the costs of doing that in line? Because obviously going to Europe costs a lot of money, and touring there, everything, Germany especially, is so expensive.
Well, it is, and it basically came down to we had a good label that was able to get us to a good promoter, and we went for 3 weeks the first time, and we didn't come back broke, but we didn't. I don't think we made much, but it wasn't about that. It was an investment to go. And then by the time we were going for our second, third, fourth tours, it started to turn around. But once again, it just came down to really hard work, and nothing came easy. It still doesn't. And then we did the same thing in China 10 years ago, where we went for a 10-day tour and broke even, fortunately, because it could have lost a lot of money on that. But we broke even, and then we went back 6 times over the next 6 years. So
Wow.
yeah, so
So
it came down to just being, that hard work ethic is what, for a band like us, it served us well, and it's still going. We're going back to Europe this year, and we're talking to China again for next year. So
excellent.
yeah.
So when you went back to China, for instance, after each time, did you find you had a larger audience and
Oh
made
yeah,
a little bit more money each time you went back?
yeah. Europe was a quick build compared to Canada. Like I say, we had to work in Niagara for 2 or 3 years before we could get a gig in Hamilton. Like it was really hard back then, because this is prior to the internet too. So you had to basically drive to places with your demo, and sell yourself with a cassette tape, and it's different now. And obviously that's one of the reasons why we got to Europe in 2003, because our stuff started to get around on the internet, and it got picked up. But yeah, in China and Europe, especially China, by the second or third tour, we were in festivals playing for 20,000 people, which to this day never happens in Canada. Like, it was just somewhere where the kind of music we do, which is R&B, funk, soul, found a real home in Europe. It found a real home in Asia. We also did a bit of work in Japan, and had one of our albums released there. So it did happen quick when those doors opened, but I guess what I'm trying to say is it took a long time for these doors to open, and that's what it takes.
Excellent. We were doing a event in Niagara one time, actually. And I always remember this because it's one of the people that came up to me, and I asked him the type of music that they played, and he named something I'd never heard of.
Uh-huh.
And I said, "Well, where is it popular?" And he said, "Well, it's really popular in Germany."
Oh yeah,
He
yeah,
said, "What should we do?" And I said, "Well, this isn't a very hard one. I think you should probably go to Germany." And he said, "Well, the drummer won't go." And I said, "Well, I think it's time to fire the drummer and go to Germany." And they said, "We can't do that." And I said, "Well, why did you ask me the question then?" And I think that's the
yeah,
case with some bands. They don't have a agreement with the band members and also the family and everything else as
yeah,
to how far this is going to go. Like, when it's time to go to Germany, are you going to be able to go, or is the family going to say, "You're not going to Germany"? You
yeah.
know,
Well, I'm fortunate. I work with guys that are in the same headspace with our uh, band as a career, as a full-time job, and understanding families. And we've all raised kids throughout this 34 years. We all have houses and mortgages, and but we're all dedicated to the cause.
yeah,
And I think that's one thing you have to be. It's really hard to find, and I don't take it for granted with the other guys I work with, because I see exactly situations like you're talking about, Jim, with somebody in the band doesn't want to do this, or doesn't want to do, or has a job, and I mean, it's really, really hard to find the right combination. And it's when you find it, if you've got those guys in the band, or if you're a solo artist and you've got that dedication to work, that's what it takes. Otherwise, maybe you shoot for something on a simpler level of playing locally, less, but still enjoying and love what you do, which is music. That's why we're all here. So
Yeah.
different levels.
Start off with Thorold or somewhere easy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've got to make it. I always say to young bands now, because I mentor a lot of bands.
Right.
And I always say, if you can't make it in your hometown, you're not going to go to the big city or the next country and make it. Like, you have to prove yourself. If you can't, gain a following with your friends and your family in your hometown, if they don't want to come see you, then it's going to be really difficult to build something somewhere else, where you've got to basically, by the time we got to Europe, or by the time we got to China, we were a well-seasoned machine that just knew how to win, absolutely win every night. And even if on the first tours, I remember in Europe, we might have, driven 8 hours for 12 people to show up. And we still gave it like, a concert or a show, like, there was 1,200 people there. And the next time we came back the next year, there was 120 people. And then the next time there was 500. So this kind of thing, where you work your act, your situation locally, and then you got, when you arrive on a world stage or a big city stage, you're kicking the doors down.
Excellent.
That's what it takes. Yeah.
So for most of your 6,000 gigs,
Yeah.
were many of those arranged by booking agents, or did you just do everything yourself?
With most, I mean, we've worked with many agents, obviously, around the world, because they know their market. And I would, being the manager of the band, the guy that does the business, I would be the liaison with these people and be able to talk their language and negotiate. So of course we use many people around the world. On a local level, I mean, I live in Niagara Falls, and I know so many people and the club owners and whatnot between here and Toronto. So I deal with them direct. But there's certain venues and festivals where you have to go through agents, and I have a great relationship with a lot of booking agents across Canada and the US. So it's all, they can deal direct, or we can deal with people that we work with and have, relationships with. So I
Great.
would say both, takes both.
Thanks, Mark. So
Yeah.
at the end, if you want to hop in the breakout room with Mark, you can ask him some more specific questions. But this is a great segue. Our next guest is Brendan McCarney. He is one of those booking agents, one of the most successful in Canada. He's with Feldman. He's been a manager, tour manager, and to add to his crazy life, him and his wife just had a baby, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that's pretty amazing. So welcome, Brendan. You're here somewhere.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, we were kind of going back and forth thinking, oh boy, this is crazy time. So I'm really glad you made it. It's excellent. So
Yeah, thanks.
yeah, so I guess the first question is, when does a band get to a point where a booking agent is going to be interested enough to take them on and make some money from it? Because it's like a catch-22. There's hardly any revenue, and you have to pay some of that to a booking agent or a manager. So how do you figure out when to get to that point and make that happen if you're in a band?
This might be a bit reductive, but it really just comes down to basic economics. When there's a requisite demand for an act, an artist, then the booking agent's going to want to create the supply for it. It's really simple. And sometimes, an act, it might take them 10 years to get signed. And sometimes they might get signed off their first show. Both happen. Same with signing to a label or a management company. There's really no difference if the agent, or, in this case, the agent involved has a gut feeling about something. It doesn't necessarily have to be making money the first day or first year, sometimes not even the first few years. It can be a long-term play, but there has to be that gut feeling. Otherwise, it really just does come down to basic economics, just supply demand.
Right. And what What are the typical commissions that an agent will take from an artist?
10% is standard pretty much anywhere in the world. I've worked with agents, in Turkey and Greece to Japan to the UK, anywhere and everywhere, and it's typically 10%. Some agencies will charge 15 in certain areas like China, Japan. There's also different systems where they'll pay for your entire trip up front, and then your guarantees will reduce that upfront cost that has been already paid for you. So it's different ways that it can work, but it's typically just 10%. If any booking agent would come to an act and want more than 15, like if they wanted 20 or like that, at that point you just walk away because that person's not reputable, let's say.
Right. Yeah, if I'm showing my age because back in the olden days when I was playing, it was 15 in those days. That's a long time ago, that's for sure. So,
Yeah.
are there particular genres that you would favor if you're looking at a band to take on that you hadn't dealt with before?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly open to most genres. Personally, though, I'm an old rock kid, so I love indie rock, punk rock, things like that. We just signed a new act at Feldman called U.S. Girls. Mag has been around for a while. It's critically acclaimed and amazing, and that's the kind of thing I personally love. Agents will not always necessarily, exclusively sign just what they personally love. Obviously, that will help the case. But sometimes, again, they could just see a gap in the market. They see an act, and even if it's not perfectly in their musical wheelhouse, they'll still take that shot with them because they understand, again, how the market works, and they want to fill that gap as best they can.
Excellent. And what kind of due diligence would you do if you're considering an act between seeing them live, looking at their online, their numbers? What are the major things you'd look at?
It really is all the basic, all the usual suspects, so to speak, are accurate, right? You're going to look at their socials to see how present they are, how they utilize them, what the following looks like. You're definitely going to want to see them live. That's obviously a big part of it because you could have an amazing album and everything, but if the people can't, if the drummer can't play drums, well, you're not going to get booked too often, or you're not going to get booked a second time at most places, that's for sure. Beyond that, I mean, personally for me, I also want to make sure that I really like the person involved. You spend a lot of time with them, or even in the case of really, if the act has a manager, making sure you really get along with the manager as well, because you do spend a lot of time with them, sometimes more than your partner at home, depending on the situation. So, for me, that's also a big thing. Some agents don't give a shit about that, pardon my French, but they don't care. But for me, getting along with the people on the team is a very important thing.
And can you or do you sell a concert promoter or a club operator on an act sight unseen? Do you have that credibility? I'm assuming you do, so that if a club owner hasn't heard of the band, they don't know them, they'll take your word that this is a good thing to do and it's going to be good for their business.
Yeah, more often than not, I would say yes. I've been in the industry for about 15 years now, 16 years. Since I was 19, I'm 35. So I built those relationships to the point where they will trust me, but that's also because I won't throw them garbage. If a show is going to lose a tremendous amount of money, we'll pull the plug rather than putting the promoter in a financially precarious situation, right? The whole point is to build trust. This industry really is based on relationships as well as capital. So you need money and you need relationships. And those are the two vehicles that allow for long-term success, at least in my estimation.
For sure. Yeah, when I was playing, we had a very good agent, and when we started out, he had that credibility that we were from Sudbury, way up in the middle of nowhere, and came to Toronto, and nobody knew us at all. But he had enough credibility that he could get us gigs, and then of course from then we had to prove that he was right. So
exactly, yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So as far as the outlook right now, how do you see it now after the pandemic and what's happened in the last year and a half? The potential for gigs and for various places to play, I guess. How do you see that compared to what it was in 2019?
Yeah, things have definitely stabilized. I don't believe that they've necessarily returned 100% back to normal, so to speak, or to the way they were in 2019. I do think across the board in specific situations, especially certain markets aren't doing as well as prior to the pandemic. A lot of theaters, so for Feldman, I handle all of the Western theaters and performing arts centers. A lot of the smaller towns that cater to an older population have noticed a drastic drop in attendance. Going from typically selling 300 tickets a show down to maybe 70, 75. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. It could be, economic precarity with some of these people, but I think a lot of it does have to do with maybe a little bit of that, carryover COVID hesitation to be out as often as they might have been prior to the pandemic. That's a very specific example. But I mean, across the board, you're seeing arena tours where tickets are $200 a piece selling out in seconds. And you're seeing some club shows, when the ticket's only $15, not do as well, I think, in a general sense, as before the pandemic. I know Justin obviously would be an even better person to ask this question to, because he handles this and sees so many events on a daily basis. But in general, it's mostly stabilized, like I said, but it's not necessarily all the way back to what it was.
And what about the festival market for this summer? How do you think that's unfolding?
It seems to be going quite well. There's definitely money there. I mean, we're very fortunate in Canada as well. We have a very, it's quite a unique situation in the sense that, a lot of these festivals are heavily subsidized by the government or by grants in general. Whereas in a lot of countries, they don't have that fortunate situation. So, it's tough for me to speak on how things are going in Poland or Germany or elsewhere. But in Canada, we're fortunate that a lot of festivals have bounced back. Some have disappeared, obviously, though. And, even something like Vancouver Folk Festival, if anyone sort of watched that unfold, they almost folded, and then sort of the community saved them in, in the 11th hour. But I do think I think this is a larger conversation, but with sort of the looming economic, the global sort of recession that we're likely walking right into at a quick speed is going to take its toll on concert goers. I think, that disposable income that people spend on entertainment's going to shrink. And so I think there will be some sort of reckoning, regardless. I don't know how big that'll be or how, monumental, but there will be something coming up soon where it'll affect festivals most because they have the highest ticket price. It's a big commitment, whether you have to travel to it, stay a couple nights over, get a bottle of water at a festival, and it's, $15 as opposed to going to a bar and getting a free glass of water. Like there's just much more of a financial commitment to festivals. And so people are in a situation where they don't have that disposable income. I think you're going to start to see things get affected a bit more. I think that even coming out of COVID, with the amount of people that were off work for a long enough period, their savings shrank to some degree. And so I think that there was even, you are seeing some festival tickets sell a bit slower, but then you also have gigantic festivals like Festival d'Été in Quebec that sold, I think, God knows how many hundreds of thousands of tickets in like 12 hours they sold out. So, it's tough to kind of give a definitive answer on that, but I'm to some degree worried about the festival situation in the long term, but in the short term, it seems to be fairly healthy enough at least.
So if an artist feels that that's a good potential place for them to be playing the festivals, what's their approach? Should they be trying to approach you, or should they be approaching festivals directly, or what's the best way to, particularly if they don't have a history of playing festivals and they're looking at it for this summer, which is obviously very close? What's the best to-do list for them?
Well, I think first and foremost is, it's having a lot of foresight. Festivals like the largest festivals tend to start booking their headliners, in the fall. So like for summer of 2024, they'll be booking in fall of 2023. Again, those are headliners. We're talking the ones that, cost exorbitant amounts of money and need to plan that far ahead. That being said, even at a development level, like most of the festivals are booked up now. I'm still dealing with a couple that have, a couple grand here, a couple grand there to throw around. But for the most part, the slots get locked up. Even the smaller festivals by like March to some degree. And there are standouts. There are always exceptions to the rule. Like Rifflandia is a large festival in Victoria. They're still doing all of their booking right now. And we're near the end of April and they're in September. So it's, it's not a perfect rule, but at the same time, you know, you want to be looking like if you want to approach a slew of festivals, I would start doing it in the, like, say November of the year prior. In a worst case, maybe wait to January, start to touch base. A lot of the festivals, if you are a developing act or emerging act, however you want to quantify it, they will kick that conversation down as far as they can, because they always want to start with their headliners, you know, because that's the draw, that's what's going to sell tickets, and they kind of move down the lineup. So the lower you are on the lineup, the earlier you play in the day, the later you'll get booked. But I would still touch base with them in January at the latest, maybe follow up in March, follow up again in the top of April. Just keep, you know, you don't want to hound anyone, but if you don't have an agent or someone who already has that relationship, you have to find a way to create it. A good thing to do too at, you know, any festivals near you is go to them, you know, attend the festival, buy a ticket, and then try to meet with someone at the, you know, those people who run the festival are extremely busy during those few days, but do your best, even try to have a cup of coffee with them 6 months before the festival. You know, again, this industry is all relationships. And so creating those relationships as early as possible is the wisest thing to do. You know, if you have an album coming out in June of this year and you start approaching festivals saying, you know, in May saying, I've got an album coming next month, book me at your festival in July, you're not going to get a reply, or they'll laugh at you. You really have to think long term. You have to think ahead as far as possible. So I think the more foresight you have, the better the results will be all in all. But it is, if you don't have an agent, you have to go to those festivals directly. You know, when I was running my management company, if acts that didn't have agents, I would do the same thing. I would go to those festivals, I'd be on site, try to meet with the people as often as I could. And you forge those relationships. So then when the next year, when the festival, you know, is booking again, you do have something to lean on. It may not be concrete in a you know, a perfect way, but at least it's something to lean on, as opposed to just cold calling someone and hoping that they give you money, because that's ultimately what you're doing. And if you did that in any other situation in life, it would be, you know, it's a bit preposterous to think that, like, you just send someone an email and hope you get $5,000 in your pocket. It's, you know, you have to work for it a little bit beyond that, if that makes sense.
For sure. So thanks, Brendan. That's great. Anybody here that wants to explore any of that further can drop into that breakout room later. So getting down to where the rubber meets the road, as they say, is we have Justin Kwan with us, who is a concert promoter and has a company now. If you look at his LinkedIn, he's, for such a sweet baby face guy, he's done a lot of stuff, that's for sure. 600 shows a year, North America and Europe. So welcome, Justin. I'm glad you could make it.
Well, thank you.
So how did you get started in this business? Where I don't remember all your bio, but how did you get involved?
I mean, when I was really, really young, you know, I played music, and that was kind of like my intro into the industry. I mean, you know, kind of the rest of your life comes and happens, and you know, I got out of school, got a real job, and yeah, I still had friends in the industry who were, you know, either working at agencies, you know, still in you know, playing music. I guess I was pretty organized enough to, you know, consistently hound venues and consistently hound other agents and agencies, and lucky enough that you know, a few venues and a few agents returned my calls and actually believed in me enough to give me a shot. And yeah, pretty much, you know, one show every 2 months as a hobby, while I worked on my day job, which was in advertising. Became you know, one show a month, became 2 shows a month, became one show every week, to I was spending way more time taking phone calls in the alleyway of the place I worked at. And you know, at that time, you know, you're young enough to take some really you know, careless chances with your career and with your life. And you know, I decided to go all in with a bunch of friends, not knowing what the hell we were doing. You know, putting all your savings into show deposits to Feldman. I'm pretty sure Tom Kemp had a lot of my money at that time. And and yeah, I mean, it was just a bunch of me and my friends at first, booking stuff out of my kitchen, and it grew from there. And it was a pretty eventful first 4 years where we couldn't even get the main floor of a dive bar, and we're carrying down the PA on our shoulders into the basement, and to the point where I was running Eastern Canada for union events after 4 years, which at the time was the second largest concert promoters in the country. And between then I had I was a festival manager at CMW, so it was a really eventful 4.5 or 4 years. So after that I went to MRG, built that company into a national promoter. Yeah, I mean, I was the director there, and yeah, during the past couple of years, I went and started my own company. Still found out I was still young enough to do that, so it's been quite a ride the last decade for sure.
Excellent. So in dealing with the musicians, because obviously you deal with a few thousand of them every year, what are the good stories, I guess? What do the better musicians do that makes it easier for you and helps to make you more successful?
Yeah, Brendan had mentioned something that really resonated with a lot of what resonates well with concert promoters. I mean, it is economics. At the end of the day, I make the joke that I'm a glorified accountant. We have money coming in, we have money coming out. There are certain budgets when it comes to the production of events. As much as we can, we never try to go over budget. And at the end of the day, it's going to sound pretty harsh, but it's not about the economics of the artists. It's about the economics of the production. If your market value is less than the opportunity cost of being able to produce a show, then it's not viable for anybody. It might be different when it comes to agencies, right? I mean, at any given point, we spend millions of dollars on Feldman artists per year. There is a lot of leverage, and there's some kind of there's a symbiotic relationship when it comes to a large promotion companies and large agencies. So we can, we give each other some rope. I'm pretty sure Brendan can tell you that not every show we do is a home run, and there's times where Brendan's pulling his hair out, and likewise. But we have a long tenured history when it comes to either working with as a company or working as in terms of individuals that work for the company. But in terms of artists that really make make that impact, I always say that the more professional you are, the more you are aware in terms of the etiquette of a show and leading up to a show, and what the accountability and responsibilities are. That's kind of the basis of of what a good working relationship is. We're very well aware that the value of sweat equity and putting your heart and soul into something has an infinite amount of value to an individual. That's something that we can definitely acknowledge. At the end of the day, things have no price to certain people. When it comes to just the hard, economics of putting on a show, there is a level of understanding that needs to take place, where sometimes the work that's put in and the sweat equity that's put in on the other side doesn't necessarily equate to what the market value is. And I think coming into a situation with that kind of understanding really helps just really levy the what the expectations are. there's certain artists where we pay $250,000, and we're glad to do it because we know that the overall gross is in the 7 figures. More than happy to do it anytime. And there's some where we're going to grind you for $250 because we know that the overall value is less than that in terms of our own overhead and in terms of, the amount of time that we spend on something. I think, the other thing too is that, as Brendan had mentioned, there are a lot of acts that we book where they're playing their first show. And they, and they're selling out the room. And I'm talking about like headliners. And we've been lucky enough that there's been such a backlog because of the pandemic. There's a ton of new artists that have come out that have, created their own buzz, that have, created a following online, quote unquote, have gone viral, and they haven't been able to perform. So when they're performing their first show, they're doing in front of 500 people, they're doing in front of 1,000 people, and then they get the agent. They don't even have management. That happens actually quite often, probably more so in the last couple of years than there has been, I believe, in the past. And I think those ones have been really good success stories. A lot of times, us as a company, we do take that extra effort to make sure we're mentoring, some of these musicians that they're able to understand the lingo, they're able to understand the business a little bit more in depth. And yeah, I mean, I think that's been the power of the internet, where, we've been able to get a good sense of, what the actual market value is of some of these artists, and be able to quantify, what their potential draw is, and be able to narrow down what their target market and demographics are, in order for us to make that connection and in turn help grow their own careers. So those are some better ones.
So with your experience with Canadian Music Week and some of the other showcasing opportunities, I just wanted to get your opinion on that. If doing showcases where you're not getting paid, or even in some cases you're paying, what the value of that is to an artist. Is it a good idea? Is it not a good idea?
I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, I don't believe that should be, I don't believe that should be your only game plan in terms of, how you want to value your art and how you want to get your foot in the door. I think, in certain, you have to do your research. You have to be able to go and make the right connections and still network. I would say, sometimes yes, sometimes no. And I know that's not necessarily the most helpful question, but at the end of the day, if I think that it's important to do those types of events. CMW has always been, such a fixture when it comes to discovery in the Canadian music industry, whether you're domestic or an international artist. I got my first kind of, taste in terms of, Asian artists, and bringing them to North America, doing CMW. And now, one of the things that we do as part of our business is we work with some of the more larger, K-pop companies overseas, and we tour them across North America. So, something like that, not the same scenario, but it is, a good place for a lot of industry folks to discover new things. So, and with that being said, there's a band called Busting the Bass, which is with Feldman, and I remember, they played in front of, they play in front of 30 people, at the Horseshoe, I believe on midnight or 1 a.m. And they got signed to Feldman because of that showcase. And I've, until recently had a relationship with them for the last 6 years or 7 years. So, it's one of those things where, yeah, I mean, I would say it's definitely worth it. But at the same time, there's always other factors where, you have to, right place, right time. There has to be an element of luck. There's obviously the things that are within your control, like creating a buzz and already coming with some sort of fanfare, or at least industry fare, to have the right people in the room. So, you know, I think there's always things that you have to do and at least check off the boxes when it's things within your control. But, you know, there is an element of luck and just being in the right place at the right time when it comes to those kind of opportunities.
Excellent. So thank you very much, Justin. So we're going to separate into the breakout rooms now, assuming Zoom hasn't lost its mind. Once I open those up, you should be able to choose which room you want to start in. As I mentioned, you can change as we go along. I want to thank all three speakers today for taking the time to do this. There's some great advice here. And again, follow up for sure. If you look at the resources, all three of them actually aren't that hard to find. So you can do some follow up. But you know, don't be afraid to ask questions. You'll have the audio and video in the breakout room, and have a good day, and we'll see you at the next event.